So we'll do that before we go on. Okay.
There we go.
And here we go. All right. So we're going to be going. All right, everybody. So we, let me see. Yep. Here we go. Copy and paste. I didn't go live yet officially. All right. Almost. And to Amanda Helman. Okay. And we are going live. And everybody, it's good to see you all. We're getting ready for our time, and I'm looking over at this whole my author page. So welcome everyone. I'll make sure I pin this on top. Okay, let's see here. All right, good. So hi everybody and welcome. We are in the 2023 new year, and I am Dr. Amanda Helman. I'm so excited to bring you some new speakers and new areas for our Traumaplicity podcast. And the Traumaplicity podcast is all about trauma and simplicity, meaning that our brain needs simple steps so it knows it's okay to move ahead. And so trauma can be one event or many events, but our encouragement is having guests on who can say, hey, I've gone through different areas. Here's my encouragement. Here's what I've been able to do to help you in the audience know that it's okay to move ahead. And so welcome, welcome, welcome. So very excited. I'm going to be talking today. We're really looking at the area of grief and loss, but I have Shelly Hood here, and she brings a whole new twist to this, and we'll be sharing part of her story and tips. So certainly as I'm on here, make sure that you share and say hello so we know you're on, and feel free to ask questions. So without further ado, Shelly Hood is a speaker, coach, and creator of Widow Rebranded, the community for widows who refuse to be defined by the status. She uses her personal experiences of being widowed at 35 and professional experience of being a whole life coach to walk with others through the devastating journey of widowhood. Shelly brings hope and possibility into a world that seems impossible. Shelly is an international coach in the area of grief and trauma, specializing in widowhood. Her mission is to see others find hope and choose to live a fulfilled life in spite of devastating circumstances without guilt or shame. Now living the life that was once on her vision board, Shelly has married again and is passionate about creating space for others who have found themselves in the wreckage of widowhood. Shelly created Widow Rebranded to provide a safe space for other widows to find their place to grieve well, heal, and hope again. It's an international group that provides tools, resources, and most importantly, a community of others who just get it. It is the community for widows who refuse to be defined by the status widow. So wow, it's so great to have you here, Shelly, and so it's such an honor to know you. And so I just want to start with you sharing what is part of your story that led you to where you are now.
Well, Amanda, thank you so much for having me here tonight. It is an honor and just a privilege to be here with your community and with your audience. I so appreciate that, and I honor you for it. A little bit about my story and my journey and why I get to speak here tonight is a few years ago, I found myself widowed. And I had been married to Brent. I thought I was waiting till late in life. I felt like, I had waited until it was far too late to even get married. Being a Southern girl, if you are not, married and have all the kids, by the time you're 25, you're an old maid, right? That's how I felt. But time worked out, and I married, and Brent had been very involved in our community and had served in our local boys' home, and so he was dad to a lot of boys who did not have their father in their life. Also having a little girl, so the day we married, became a wife, a mom, and a nana all on the same day.
Wow.
And so we built and we loved, and we had an open home, engaged in our community, let them come in and engage with us. And it's beautiful. I mean, it was what life was supposed to be. And One Sunday afternoon, things just didn't seem right. He wasn't feeling good. Things just wasn't clicking. I called my mom. It was literally the week the world was shutting down.
Mm.
And I was like, Mom, I'm really not sure about this. I think it's probably just an infection. Not sure about taking him into the ER. I feel like that's more dangerous than not, because, you know, everybody was encouraged, if you didn't need to be out, don't be. She was like, Shelly, get your clothes and get his, and I will be there to pick you up shortly. And that night we didn't leave the ER without a diagnosis. 48 hours later, we were sitting in Indianapolis. His family was there. And that's where I felt like he could get better medical care and spend his time with his family. If anything were to happen, I didn't want to have any regrets about that. So we did, and we got some incredible, you know, family time. But we found ourselves 49 days later when he transitioned. And so I was left just kind of picking up the pieces. Not really sure how you do that, how you wrap your head around it, what that looks like. How did this happen? All of the questions. But there was something I just came to have to settle inside of me. There was this, John Acuff calls it a soundtrack, you know, those loose thoughts that just bounce everywhere. There was this one line that rang over and over, and I found myself like screaming inside of my head, don't call me a widow. I couldn't handle it. I couldn't relate. In my mind, the widow that I pictured was, you know that old lady that sits on like the front pew at church, like in the corner, that always has her own box of Kleenexes, that cries all the time, is super depressed to herself, you know, snappy, bitter, angry. I couldn't relate. That was the mental picture I had of what a widow was. Now, I've since come to find out that's definitely not the truth. That was just me. But going on the journey of saying, what does this mean? If I'm not going to be defined by this, what does that even look like? I lived in a small town. This is my hometown. I didn't know other young widows. That didn't make sense to me. So just a little further out now. And I'm just grateful to be able to say that there is hope in that process. There is hope for the other side. Doesn't feel like it at all, but there is.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. And thank you for sharing your story. You know, every time I know I've heard it in different ways, but the way that you shared it, and that, you know, all this stuff in such a short amount of time happened. And then you were like, well, what does that look like? You know, that I can't relate to widow, and just shifting and figuring out what does that look like in the middle of all of your grief and everything else that led you. I really think for even those who are in the audience, you know, they might be in different places, or those who listen later on the podcast, that they either that just happened to them, or they're in the middle of it, right? And maybe can relate to you. So in terms of this, what were some strategies, maybe 3 or 5, you know, it could be coping skills or strategies, like what did you use, or what helped you go through this traumatic event?
Sure. There are some real tangible tools that you can find. You know, there is tons of advice on what you should do and you shouldn't do. And here's my number one. Anytime you hear a should from outside influences or self, that needs to go in the trash. That should implies like this certain level of expectation. And when you're walking through something like this, like there is no handbook for it. The way I grieve and the way I process is unique to me. The way somebody else unpacks their grief and their trauma is unique to them. There is no right or wrong way. One of the first things I did was I gave myself permission to say yes to me to recreate my space.
Mm.
So in my home, it was so hard to look around and all I saw was his absence. I know this is really different for people who've been married for a long time. You know, they see the memories that were created. We just hadn't had that time together. So I saw the absence of what could have been. And so in order for me to create a space of peace, for me to process the grief, I decided it was okay to change the way it looked. I wanted my eyes to see something different. My eyes could not see the same space where there had only been the two of us or had only been our family. I needed something different. So I started painting the walls. So I changed up the furniture. My bedroom looked completely different. And here's the deal. The truth is, he was no longer there. And what that meant was I didn't have to ask anybody else. So the paint color that I loved, that he hated, guess what went on my walls? And that was what was okay for me. That's what brought me peace. We had a painting that was in our dining room, and it was kind of an inside joke. We had a local painter and artist, and she taught classes in our coffee shop. And he did not like pictures of animals on the wall. It weirded him out. He did not like it. So one night I said, hey, I need you to do this for me. So there's this giant painting. So when he passed, I saw this incredible print of a Highland cow that made me so stinking happy. And that went on my living room wall. The scents that I loved that he couldn't stand. So my house the next week, it smelled like pumpkin spice, and it was not pumpkin spice season. It was the little things. So sometimes it's not the big steps. It's those little bitty steps that just take you that create the momentum, that create that next step forward. What is that? For me, I needed to know what space felt like for me by myself, not with a partner in that season. The next thing I would say is grace, grace, grace for yourself, and then more grace. I am not somebody who by nature has a lot of grace for myself. I'm kind of hard on myself, especially when it's like I see that there are things ahead that I'm perfectly capable of doing that in past seasons I was super sharp about. So now that I've experienced this grief and this deep trauma, there's that brain fog. And things just don't come as clearly sometimes. Some days are really hard. You don't find yourself able to get up quite as easily or go as quickly or able to put together the grocery list. The things that were normal and were easy aren't. So I just had to say, okay, this is a different season and I've never walked this season before. I don't know how to be this person. So now I have to learn how to become her. And so I would just encourage that grace, grace, grace. And then when you think you have run out of grace for yourself, one more dose of grace. It does get easier. I hear people say a lot that time heals all wounds, and I so disagree with that. I so disagree. I think time gives space to be able to grieve and it not feel so intense. But time and some intentional healing is where that heals. I know too many people that lost their spouse years ago, and I still see them say, I can't hardly get out of bed. I was terrified to become that person So that's what kept me just taking that next step forward. I was literally terrified. I would have an internal panic attack going, how is this my life? And I cannot become this. And so those are a couple of things that I would do. And look, wherever you are in your belief system, you have to find hope and faith. Like however you want to split that hair, hope, faith. There has to be something that you believe in, even if it's yourself, if it's something else, if you want to say a higher power, greater energy, whatever you're believing in. I need for you, if you are new to this world, find something you can believe in. At the point that you don't believe in anything and you don't see hope at all, then there is no reason to take that next step forward. And we can't have you there. So those are a few things that I did just to get my mind in a space where I could start to look at the bills or start to figure out what financial structures look like, or what in the world was I going to do for a job? You know, all of those things come. But if you are not in a mental state where you can process some of that, I think that it's a lot harder to do. So those first couple, start there.
That's great. Well, thank you so much, Shelly, for your vulnerability. And a couple things that stood out. The first thing, when you said shoulds, when you hear that from yourself or others, to really look at and hear the dialogue, the thinking, what's behind it, and knowing that how you're processing it. And healing isn't linear. So there's sometimes we go through and we think we're good, and then we come back. And also the grace, the grace to be where you need to be and allow that to happen. Something else that stood out was just even the steps you took. You're like, hey, for me, I wanted to put paint on the wall to just start to really allow yourself to do some things that are different, allowing yourself to shift one step at a time. And so those are all really helpful. And I'm glad that you shared some of your journey, even in all this pain, that your journey and what worked for you. So there's a lot of different people that are out there. There might be people that have just, of different ages, that lost somebody they loved and are grieving. What are three, it could be a phrase, a word, it could be some type of example. I know you've shared a lot, but how would you encourage someone, and it's a little challenging, but kind of, how would you encourage someone that might be in the beginning, middle, and at the end of kind of like longer on their journey in this area? What would you say to them?
Okay, so for anybody that's in the beginning of this, I'm going to just tell you to breathe. No, really, like breathe. There was a moment where I remember feeling the breath in the bottom of my lungs for the first time in a long time. And I was like, wait a minute, what is that? Why does that feel weird? And it was because I had not been breathing at full capacity. I had been in this place of just like survival. Let me just get through. Can I just get to that next moment? And so I'm going to tell you, just take a deep breath. Give yourself permission to just breathe. This isn't a race. In fact, I'll remind you that I think it's considered, the first 2 years are considered early grief. And that sounds like a long time. I know it does. I know it does. But you will get there, and it is possible. Another thing I would say is, you're not doing it wrong. Like, I have seen women in all different places of this journey, different ages, different stages. One of the ladies in my community, she kind of coined the phrase, we're at different ages and different stages, both stages of life and stages of grief. We all do this differently. We're in different places of life, and we have different goals or outcomes that we're looking at. You're not doing it wrong. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Are you in a place that is filled with hope and forward momentum? If you can self-reflect and you can say, you know what, I am okay and good. Don't allow that internal voice to make you think that you're screwing up the grief process. That's not possible. The fact that you're thinking about where you are in grief, that in and of itself is such a healthy thing. And I would tell you that get in community, no matter where you are in the process. If you are brand new to this world, my heart goes out to you. If you are a couple of years out and you're like, you know what, I feel like I'm just starting to wake up again, I'm not sure where to go from here, I'm going to tell you, get in a community. If you were widowed 10 years ago, and some of those things are still a little tough, and you just need to be around others who just get it, get in community. Community of others that do fun things. They can shift your mindset and your atmosphere. Community of others who can love on you. And a community of widows who get it, that you don't have to explain. If it's a tough day and you show up and you say, hey, it's a tough day, no explanation necessary. So those are a couple of things that I would say are hit those, and you just set yourself up to begin a really great process of grieving well, healing, finding hope, and finding who you are all over again.
Thank you. That's great. So thank you so much. So I know you shared some really encouraging messages, especially for a lot of women, just to breathe, just to know that they can be in community and know that the journey looks different for each person, and you can't do it wrong. I love that. You can't grieve wrong. You're just learning how to grieve and what does it even look like when you're not sure where you've ever been. And definitely no matter where you're at in the process to get in the community. So thank you so much for sharing that, Shelly. And I'm just looking at some people are saying hello on Facebook, and certainly even on the podcast, people will be writing in messages. But I wanted some of the people tuning in, they are perhaps just starting this journey and as and through this whole grief process. So how can they get a hold of you? What are some ways that they can get a hold of you or ask questions perhaps after they listen to this?
Absolutely. Well, I always encourage you to engage wherever you see this action. So if you're here in the podcast, engage. If you're on, the YouTube channel, engage, because that's incredible. You're building community here. To find me and Widow Rebranded, I'm gonna make it real easy. We're gonna go to facebook.com/groups/Widow Rebranded, or inside of Facebook, you can click the groups icon and you can search Widow Rebranded. And you might ask, why rebranded? Like, that doesn't really make sense, because when you hear widow, all of us have that mental image of what a widow looks like. And I am convinced that that is not the truth. That mental image of being stuck in grief and stuck in trauma that's not your final destination. And so we are rebranding that identity, because widow is not your new identity.
That's powerful. So thank you so much. Widow is not your identity. And definitely I have the Facebook group on here. Hopefully I had it right, and we'll have that. Is there an email they could use as well, or would you prefer them just go to your Facebook group?
They can go to the Facebook groups, or they can email me at Shelly@widowrebranded.com.
Okay. So email Shelly at widowrebranded.com, and I'll just make sure I have that email correct, and I'll put it into the chat later. Shelly, it's been amazing hearing your story, your encouragement, things that you've done, and everybody out there know that you can grab on to some of these tools, or perhaps add on to it that you have your own. But I love having people on sharing their journey, because then you can hear it, and also encouragement. So those of you who are watching live, or perhaps you can relate in a different way to this, it's those simple steps. Shelly took simple steps, one little step at a time, and that's perfectly okay. And give yourself that permission to have grace. And so if you are tuning in, we are live every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here. And then I have the Traumaplicity podcast that goes out live later. So you'll be able to hear Shelly if you want to listen audio later down the road. And so without further ado, just know that you're loved, that you matter, and that you're worthy at all times, even in all these different events. And know that no matter what happens, that you're seen, you're heard. And so we want to encourage you on the show. So thank you all for tuning in. Thank you, Shelly, once again for being on. And we'll catch you all next time, everybody. So take care. Bye.